Hakim entered the room, his steps deliberate but cautious. He could feel the anger radiating from his father before a word was spoken. "What is the meaning of this letter?" the king demanded, holding out the letter. Hakim glanced at it, and his heart sank. Femi's words were etched in his memory, but to see them in his father's hands felt like a betrayal of their love. The kiss had left them both breathless, standing in the dim light of the servants' corridor where secrets thrived. It was brief but electric, a moment that neither could take back. Femi was the first to pull away, his chest heaving as he stared at Hakim. "Do you know what this means?" Femi whispered, his voice trembling. There was fear in his eyes, but also something softer, a glimmer of hope that Hakim couldn't ignore. Hakim's answer came without hesitation. "It means I won't run from this anymore." But the reality of their situation pressed heavily on both of them. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken fears. Footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor, snapping them back to the dangers of their stolen moment. Without another word, they separated, retreating to their respective corners of the palace, their hearts pounding in unison. The next day, Hakim found himself unable to focus. In the grand hall, where advisors debated trade agreements and royal envoys sought audiences, his mind wandered back to the kiss. He barely noticed the disapproving stares of the council as he fidgeted in his seat. Meanwhile, Femi moved through the palace grounds like a shadow, avoiding prolonged conversations and staying out of sight whenever he could. The weight of their secret gnawed at him. Every glance toward the towering palace reminded him of the impossibility of what had begun between them. Yet he couldn't ignore the pull, the ache to be near Hakim again. By evening, as the palace settled into its quiet hum, Hakim sent a note to Femi through a trusted maid. It was short but clear. "Meet me in the old storeroom tonight. We need to talk." The storeroom was tucked away in an abandoned wing of the palace, its once proud shelves now covered in dust and cobwebs. Hakim paced nervously as he waited for Femi, the flickering lantern casting restless shadows on the walls. When Femi arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. They stood facing each other, the silence stretching out until Femi finally spoke. "Hakim, this isn't just about us anymore. People are talking. If they find out—" "I know," Hakim interrupted, his voice low but firm. "I know the risks, but I also know what I feel. Do you regret it?" Femi's eyes softened, his hesitation melting away. "No," he said quietly. "I don't regret it." Hakim stepped closer, his hand reaching for Femi's. "Then let's not waste time being afraid. If this is all we can have, then I'll take it, even if it's just stolen moments." Their hands clasped together, and for a moment, the world outside didn't matter. The nights became their sanctuary. In the storeroom, Hakim and Femi laughed, shared secrets, and dreamed of a life where love wasn't a crime. On one such night, Hakim brought a small gift, a necklace with a simple stone pendant he had made himself. "It's not much," Hakim said shyly as he placed it around Femi's neck. "But I wanted you to have something that's just from me." Femi touched the pendant, his smile radiant in the dim light. "It's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Hakim." For a moment, they were no longer a prince and a servant, but two people who had found something precious in a world that sought to deny them. But the spell was broken when faint footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. They both froze, their hearts racing. Hakim quickly doused the lantern, as Femi pulled him into the shadows. The door creaked open slightly, and they held their breath until the intruder moved on. When the danger passed, Femi whispered, "We need to be more careful." Hakim nodded, but the thrill of their closeness, even in the face of risk, only made his resolve stronger. As their stolen moments became more frequent, whispers began to emerge in the palace halls. Hakim's increasing absences and Femi's frequent disappearances did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, Hakim overheard two courtiers speaking in hushed tones. "They say the prince has been seen sneaking around the servant quarters at odd hours," one muttered. "And with a man, no less," the other added, their tone heavy with disapproval. The palace grew colder, not from the weather, but from the tension that seemed to thrum in its walls. Hakim felt the weight of every glance, every murmur that followed him. At dinner that evening, King Malik's eyes lingered on his son, sharp and questioning. When the meal ended, the king pulled Hakim aside. "You've been distracted," Malik said, his tone even but laced with suspicion. "Is there something you need to tell me?" Hakim met his father's gaze, his heart pounding. "No, father. Everything is as it should be." But Malik's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, my son. There are those who watch your every move, waiting for you to falter." Hakim nodded, his expression calm. But inside, the storm was already raging. That night, as he met Femi in their secret place, he knew their time was running out. "We'll need to decide soon," Hakim said quietly. "If we wait too long, there won't be a way out." Femi's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "Then we'll decide together. Whatever happens, I'm with you." One day, a palace attendant approached King Malik in his private chamber, bowing deeply before presenting him with a folded piece of parchment. "Your Majesty, I found this in the prince's chamber. It seems suspicious." King Malik's eyes narrowed as he unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but clear, and the words leapt off the page. "Hakim, my love, though the rumors grow louder, my heart remains yours. Even as we keep our distance, know that every breath I take is for you. Someday, we will find a place where our love can exist freely, without fear or shame." Fury flashed in the king's eyes. "Who wrote this?" The servant hesitated. "I do not know, Your Majesty, but it was hidden in his belongings." "Summon Hakim. Now!" Hakim entered the room, his steps deliberate but cautious. He could feel the anger radiating from his father before a word was spoken. "What is the meaning of this letter?" the king demanded, holding out the letter. Hakim glanced at it, and his heart sank. Femi's words were etched in his memory, but to see them in his father's hands felt like a betrayal of their love. "I don't know who wrote that," Hakim lied, his voice steady. "Perhaps someone wishes to tarnish my name." "You dare to insult my intelligence?" the king bellowed. "Do you deny that this is addressed to you?" "I deny any truth to it," Hakim replied firmly. "This is a plot, father, likely from someone envious of our family." King Malik scrutinized his son's face, searching for any sign of deception. After a long pause, he slammed the letter onto the table. "Very well, but hear me, Hakim. If I find out this is true, there will be consequences." Later, King Malik called the servant who had brought him the letter. "If you ever bring me such baseless accusations again, you will be dismissed from this palace," he warned. The servant bowed, trembling. "Yes, Your Majesty. It will not happen again." "Good. I will not have my household consumed by idle gossip," the king declared. As the servant left, King Malik turned back to the letter, his thoughts still heavy. Could his son truly be involved in something forbidden? Or was this indeed the work of a schemer? A few days later, Princess Aisha's carriage approached the palace gates, its golden embellishments glinting under the midday light. She stepped out of the carriage with an air of quiet confidence, her teal and gold gown flowing gracefully, a testament to her royal upbringing. King Malik greeted her warmly, extending a hand to lead her inside. He welcomed her warmly, and then introduced her to Hakim. Princess Aisha offered a kind smile to Hakim, her gaze lingering just long enough to sense his hesitation. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Your Highness," she said softly. Hakim inclined his head. "And you, Princess. Welcome to our home." The brief exchange was polite yet strained, a fact not lost on Aisha as they proceeded into the grand halls of the palace. Days passed, and Princess Aisha began to notice the subtle nuances in Hakim's demeanor. Though he was polite and respectful, there was an emotional distance that puzzled her. He seemed to avoid her presence, spending much of his time walking alone in the gardens or retreating early to his chambers. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in the palace library, Aisha found herself seated across from King Malik. She took a deep breath and decided to speak her mind. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something?" King Malik set his book aside and nodded. "Of course, Princess. Speak freely." "It's about Prince Hakim," she began carefully. "He seems distant. Is he always this reserved, or have I done something to offend him?" The king's brow furrowed for a moment before he gave her a reassuring smile. "You mustn't take it personally, Aisha. Hakim has always been thoughtful, perhaps too much so. He carries the weight of expectations heavily, but I assure you, he will come around. Give him time. He will soon see your worth and recognize your presence." Aisha nodded, though the unease lingered. One day, Hakim sat by the grand fountain in the palace gardens, the gentle sound of water soothing his restless thoughts. His mind drifted back to moments spent with Femi, hidden smiles, stolen touches, whispered dreams of freedom. But now, the shadow of expectation loomed larger than ever, and his heart felt suffocated under its weight. The arrival of Princess Aisha had only added to his turmoil. She was kind and graceful, undeserving of the coldness he showed her. Yet his heart had already been claimed, leaving no room for anyone else. Femi's absence burned like an ache in his chest. Though they still exchanged fleeting glances and rare, hurried words in secret, the growing scrutiny in the palace had made their meetings nearly impossible. Hakim looked up at the sky, the orange hues of dusk painting the clouds. For now, all he could do was endure. That evening, as the palace prepared for dinner, Hakim caught sight of Femi in the distance, tending to a decorative lantern near the dining hall entrance. Their eyes met briefly, and the world seemed to fall away. Though the interaction lasted mere seconds, it reignited a flicker of hope within Hakim. Femi's steady gaze reminded him of their promise, of the future they dreamed of, even if it felt impossibly far. Hakim resolved to find a way to see Femi that night, no matter the risk. Thank you so much for staying till the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of The Gay Prince and the Palace Servant. Tell me in the comments if you would like a part 3. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to me. Have a nice time till we meet again in our next story.